Tripp's Adventures. In high and far-off times, there was a young man named Tripp who loved traveling the world. Tripp was born to push the limits. He was an audacious one and took on some of the more dangerous adventures. On his to-do list was hiking to the top of Incline Mountain and skiing down Mount Linear. It wasn't long before Tripp was getting ready for his travels. Prior to packing, he needed to know how steep the mountains were, so he knew what equipment he needed to bring along with him. Tripp took out his map of Incline Mountain. He overlaid a clear coordinate plane on top. He said to himself.
It's been harder than I've been hiking. I don't know how to find the steepness of the mountain.
He contemplated at the table for a few minutes. It had come to him. First, he needed to plot 2 points from the mountainside on the coordinate plane. Next, Tripp needed to connect the points by making a right triangle. Then he just had to count the boxes of how tall the mountain is and how long or far out it goes. Thinking out loud, Tripp said to himself,
Slope is right over 1. Incline on 8/5.
That means when ascending or hiking up the mountain, Tripp needs to make sure he brings his short hiking poles to account for the steepness. When he descends or comes down the mountain, he will need a longer set of hiking poles to help with his balance. Tripp will get to experience 2 types of slope on his hike: a positive slope going up the hill and a negative slope coming down the hill. Now that Tripp knows what he needs for Incline Mountain, he needs to find out what he needs for skiing down Mount Linear. Tripp will ascend the mountain on a chairlift. The chairlift does not have a very steep slope, so people don't fall out of it. Tripp put the chairlift on the coordinate plane to see how steep it is. Again, he made 2 points, connected them making a right triangle, and counted the squares for rise over run. Tripp figured it out.
The last slope is 1/3.
One of Tripp's favorite part of his adventures is the downhill skiing. Coming down the mountain around 55 miles per hour gets his adrenaline pumping. Tripp cannot wait. This time, Tripp is using another way to find slope. Instead of counting rise over run boxes, he will look at the ordered pairs, -12, 10, and -2, -2. He first needs to identify the 2 x coordinates, -12 and -2, and the 2 y coordinates, 10 and -2. The equation he is going to use is y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. The second y is -2, so -2 minus 10 equals -12. And the second x is -2, so -2 minus -12 equals 10. -12 over 10 simplifies to -6/5. Tripp cannot wait for his next set of adventures to begin. There is supposed to be a lot of fresh snow on the ground during his travels. That means that the probability of avalanches happening increases. To make sure he is prepared for his fast speeds and fresh snow, Tripp needs to make sure he has his backcountry access tracker in case someone is buried in an avalanche. Tripp went on his hiking and skiing adventures. Before he knew it, they were over. And so, there he sits, pondering his next endeavor. The end.